The wood of the front door didn't just creak, it groaned under a pressure that felt deliberate. I wasn't breathing. I couldn't. I stood in the center of the kitchen, a rusted hunting knife, white-knuckled in my grip, watching the deadbolt vibrate. 3 heavy, rhythmic strikes, spaced exactly 4 seconds apart. It wasn't a knock, it was a measurement. Something outside was testing the strength of the oak, testing the limits of my sanity, and worst of all, it was doing it in total, suffocating silence. No growl, no heavy breathing, just the sound of those footsteps retreating back into the tree line, crunching through the frozen leaves with the weight of something that shouldn't be upright. My name is Elias, and 3 days ago, I thought the greatest threat in these woods was my own loneliness. I was dead wrong. I've always been a person who craved the quiet. In the city, the noise is a physical weight. Sirens, hums, the constant vibration of millions of people living on top of one another. I needed to disappear. I found the cabin on a deep web rental forum for people looking to go off-grid for a month. No GPS coordinates, just a set of handwritten directions and a key left under a flat stone at a trailhead 6 miles from the nearest paved road. When I first arrived, it was everything I'd dreamed of. The cabin was a sturdy, silver-grey structure of cedar and stone, nestled in a valley where the trees grew so thick they seemed to weave a canopy that strangled the sunlight. There was an intoxicating smell of pine and damp earth. I remember throwing my pack onto the porch and just laughing. I felt invincible. I felt free. For the first 6 hours I was busy, chopping wood, hauling water from the creek, setting up my typewriter. But as the sun dipped below the jagged horizon, the excitement began to curdle into something else. It started with the silence. In the city, quiet is a lack of noise. Out here, the silence was an active force. It felt heavy, like a liquid filling my ears. When I stopped moving, the world didn't just go still. It felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for me to make a mistake. I laughed it off at first. Urban nerves, I told myself. I poured a glass of whiskey and sat by the fire, watching the shadows of the flames dance against the logs. But even then, I found myself turning down the volume of the crackling wood, trying to hear what was happening on the other side of those walls. The first night was supposed to be the best sleep of my life. Instead, I lay awake, staring at the rafters. Around 2 a.m., I heard it. It was faint, a single step on the perimeter of the cabin. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I waited. 5 minutes passed. 10. Just as I began to convince myself it was a falling branch or a shifting log, it happened again. 2 steps. Bipedal. There was a distinct cadence to it, the heel hitting, then the ball of the foot. It sounded heavy, like a man weighing 200 pounds. But there was no reason for anyone to be out here. The nearest neighbor was a day's hike away. I crept to the window, peeling back the heavy wool curtain just a fraction of an inch. The moonlight was a cold, pale blue, casting long, skeletal shadows across the clearing. Nothing. The snow was undisturbed. The trees stood like sentinels. I went back to bed. But the logic my brain was trying to feed me felt like a lie. If there were no tracks, how could there be footsteps? By the second day, the echoes moved from the night into the afternoon. I was out back, splitting the last of the hemlock logs, when I heard a footstep directly behind me. It was so clear, so close, that I felt the vibration in the soles of my own boots. I spun around, swinging the axe in a blind, terrified arc. Empty air. There was no one there, but the grass was flattened in 2 small patches, 5 feet away from me, as if someone had been standing there watching me work and had stepped back just as I turned. My skin went cold. The air suddenly felt 10 degrees thinner. I wasn't just alone in the woods anymore. I was being hunted by something that didn't leave a trail, something that moved with a terrifying rhythmic precision. I went inside and locked the door. I didn't realize then that a lock is only useful if the thing you're afraid of is made of flesh and bone. I spent the next 4 hours pacing the floorboards, trying to build a cage of logic to keep the fear out. "It's an auditory hallucination," I whispered to the empty room. "The isolation is triggering a latent psychosis. The brain abhors a vacuum. It's creating sounds to fill the silence." I almost believed it. I wanted to believe I was going crazy, because the alternative, that something was out there, invisible and sentient, was 1,000 times worse. But then, the footsteps started on the roof. If you are enjoying this story, please like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you. The sound of footsteps on the roof wasn't a scramble or the light skittering of a squirrel. It was a slow, deliberate march. Thump, thump, thump. Directly above my head. I looked up at the cedar beams, my eyes wide and stinging from a lack of sleep. I could see the dust shaking loose from the cracks in the wood with every impact. Whatever was up there wasn't just heavy, it was arrogant. It wanted me to know exactly where it was. "Who's there?" I screamed, my voice cracking, sounding thin and pathetic in the vastness of the woods. The footsteps stopped instantly. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. It was a vacuum, a hollow pressure that made my ears ring. I grabbed my flashlight and a heavy iron fire poker, and I bolted for the door. I had to know. If I could just see it, a person, a prankster, even a bear, I could deal with it. It's the unknown that kills you. The mind fills the gaps with monsters. I threw the door open and sprinted into the freezing night air, shining the hushed beam of the light up toward the roofline. My heart was a frantic drum in my chest. I circled the cabin, the light cutting through the dark like a blade. Nothing. The roof was empty. No branches were hanging low enough to hit the shingles. No ladders. No footprints in the light dusting of frost on the porch. I looked out into the tree line, and for a split second, I saw it. Or I thought I did. A tall, thin shape, darker than the surrounding blackness, standing perfectly still between two pines. I froze, my breath hitching. I turned the light toward the spot. Just trees, just shadows. I went back inside, but I didn't go back to bed. I couldn't. I dragged a heavy dresser in front of the door, my hands shaking so hard I could barely grip the wood. I was no longer a guest in this cabin. I was a prisoner. Sleep deprivation is a slow poison. By the third night, the edges of my vision began to fray. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to stretch and pulse like they were breathing. I kept the fire roaring, terrified of the dark, but the flickering orange light only made the cabin feel more like a tomb. Every sound was magnified. The settling of the foundation sounded like a gunshot. The wind whistling through the chimney sounded like a woman humming a low, tuneless melody. But the footsteps, they were the only thing that stayed consistent. They had a personality now. They were curious. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my reflection in the dark window. I looked like a ghost of myself, hollow-eyed, pale, a man haunted by a sound. And then I saw it. In the reflection, behind me, the door to the small bedroom was slowly, silently swinging open. I didn't move. I couldn't. I watched in the glass as the darkness of the bedroom gaped like a mouth. And then, from the floor of that room, I heard the sound of a bare foot sliding across the floorboards. Shh! It was inside. It wasn't outside anymore. It had found a way in, Or maybe it had been here the whole time, waiting for me to get tired enough, weak enough, to notice it. I gripped the fire poker until my knuckles bled. I didn't turn around. I sat there for 3 hours, staring at that reflection, watching the doorway. Nothing came out, but I could feel the heat of a presence behind me. I could feel a gaze so heavy it felt like a physical weight on the back of my neck. Morning brought no relief. The sun was a dull, sickly grey behind a thick blanket of clouds. I decided I was leaving. To hell with the deposit. To hell with the escape. I started throwing my clothes into my bag, my movements frantic and disorganized. I just needed to get to the car. I reached for my car keys on the counter. They were gone. I knew I had put them there. I am a creature of habit. I always put my keys next to my wallet. I searched the floor, the cupboards and the bedding. I was screaming now, throwing furniture aside, sobbing with a mixture of rage and pure, unadulterated terror. I found them. They were inside the wood stove, sitting on top of the cold ashes. They hadn't fallen there. They had been placed there, arranged in a perfect circle with 3 small stones I had brought in from the creek. My stomach turned. This wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a hallucination. This was intelligent. It was playing with me. It was a cat batting at a mouse with a broken back. It didn't just want to hurt me. It wanted to break me. It wanted me to understand that I didn't own my movements anymore. I looked at the keys, then at the door, then at the woods beyond. The trees looked different now. They didn't look like nature. They looked like a wall, a cage. I realized then that the footsteps I had been hearing weren't just sounds. They were a countdown, and I was running out of time. If you are enjoying this story, please like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you. By 4 p.m. on the 3rd day, the sun didn't just set, it surrendered. A thick, unnatural fog rolled in from the valley, swallowing the pines until the cabin felt like it was floating in a grey void. I didn't bother with the car keys anymore. I knew the car wouldn't start, or the tires would be slashed, or the road would be gone. This thing, this entity, had moved the goalposts. I began the fortification. It was a manic, feverish process. I hammered long finishing nails into the window frames. I dragged the heavy oak dining table against the front door and wedged the back of a chair under the handle of the rear exit. I was sweating despite the biting chill, my breath coming in jagged, shallow gasps. Then the sun vanished completely, and the symphony began. It started as a single tap on the glass of the bedroom window. Tink, like a fingernail. Then a response from the kitchen. Tink. Then the roof. Thud. Within minutes, the cabin was surrounded by the sound of 100 invisible people. Footsteps were running, actually sprinting, in circles around the house. The sound of heavy boots on the porch, the soft padding of bare feet on the dirt, the rhythmic dragging of something heavy across the stones. It was a cacophony of movement, a wall of sound that vibrated through the floorboards and into my bones. I retreated to the center of the room, clutching a kerosene lamp in one hand and the fire poker in the other. I sat on the floor, the smallest target I could make of myself. "What do you want?" I screamed. The noise stopped. The silence that followed was so sudden it felt like a physical blow. Then came the whispers. They weren't coming from outside. They were coming from the walls themselves. It didn't sound like a language. It sounded like a mimicry of human speech, the cadence of a conversation without any of the words. A low, gravelly mumble rising and falling in pitch. And then, the most terrifying sound of my life. My own voice, coming from just outside the front door. "I just need to get to the car. the voice said. It was me. It was my exact inflection, my exact tone of panic from earlier, that afternoon. I just need to get to the car. The door handle began to turn. Slowly. Harder. The wood of the frame started to splinter. Something was throwing its entire weight against the oak. I didn't think. I didn't plan. Survival instinct is a cold, blinding light that erases everything but the next second. I knew if I stayed in this cabin, I would be dead. Or worse, I would be taken. By morning. I didn't use the doors. I knew they were watching the doors. I went to the small, high window in the bathroom that looked out toward the steepest part of the ridge. I smashed the glass with the fire poker, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the stillness. I didn't care about the noise anymore. I scrambled through the frame, the jagged glass tearing at my jacket and the skin of my palms, and I tumbled into the freezing mud. I didn't look back. I ran. I ran until my lungs felt like they were filled with crushed glass. Every time my boots hit the ground, I heard an extra set of footsteps behind me. I would swerve through the thickets, thorns tearing at my face, and the sound would follow, mimicking my every turn. I wasn't running through the woods. I was running through a gauntlet. I reached the trailhead where I had parked my old truck. I dived into the cab, fumbling the keys into the ignition with blood-slicked fingers. The engine groaned. It sputtered. Please, please. The engine roared to life just as a hand, long, pale, and possessing too many joints, slapped against the driver's side window. I didn't look at the face. I floored it. The truck fishtailed on the gravel, the headlights cutting through the fog to reveal nothing. The road was empty. But as I sped away, looking into the rearview mirror, I saw the fog parting. Standing in the middle of the road was a figure. It was wearing my jacket. It was standing exactly the way I stand. And as I watched, it raised a hand and waved, a slow, mocking gesture of goodbye. I drove until I hit a gas station 3 hours away. I sat in the fluorescent light of the parking lot until the sun came up, staring at my hands, unable to stop the rhythmic tapping of my fingers on the steering wheel. I never went back for my things. The rental agency claimed they had no record of a cabin at those coordinates. They told me the deep web forum I used had been offline for years. To the world, that cabin doesn't exist. But I know it does. I have the scars on my hands to prove it. I live in the loudest part of the city now. I keep the TV on, the radio blasting, and the white noise machine humming at max volume. I need the noise, because when it gets quiet, really quiet, I start to hear it again. I'll be sitting in my apartment, and I'll take a step toward the kitchen, and a split second later, from the empty hallway behind me, I'll hear it. Thud, thud. It didn't stay in the woods. It didn't stay in the cabin. It followed the sound of my heart. And now it's just waiting for the silence to return. Because it knows, eventually, everyone has to stop running. Eventually, it gets quiet for everyone. And when it does, you'll hear the footsteps too.